The final stand. The cold void of space was a battleground where only the strongest could survive, and Captain Eric "Buck" Rogers was about to prove just how strong humanity could be. His sleek, state-of-the-art fighter, the Aegis, was shaking violently as plasma blasts tore through the darkness, ricocheting off his shields. Sweat dripped down his brow, his fingers clenching tightly around the controls as he piloted the fighter through a chaotic debris field. His eyes darted across the scanner readouts, nothing but flashing red and yellow alerts. Everything had gone wrong. "Come on, baby, hold together," Buck muttered, his voice strained as he fought to keep the Aegis steady. The ship was bucking violently, dodging wreckage from destroyed warships and enemy fighters. The harsh glow of exploding ships lit up the darkness around him. Alien fighters, sleek and deadly, were swarming like hornets, and he was the only human alive to fend them off. A plasma bolt sizzled past his cockpit, narrowly missing his starboard wing. The heat wave from the blast set off an alarm, and a warning flashed across the HUD, but Buck barely registered it. His mind was focused solely on the target behind him. An alien fighter, locked in pursuit, determined to end his life. The Aegis was a marvel of human engineering, but even the best technology could only do so much when facing an enemy this relentless. Buck juked hard to port, sending his fighter spiraling into a dangerously sharp dive. The inertial dampers screamed in protest, but he didn't care. He needed to lose the enemy. The alien fighter was relentless, staying right on his tail. His ship creaked under the stress of the maneuvering. Buck's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline surging. He pushed the throttle forward, streaking toward a dense cluster of debris. Wrecked ships, shattered fragments of the battle that had erupted in space. At the last moment, he cut power to his engines and fired the maneuvering thrusters, flipping the Aegis 180 degrees. The alien fighter shot past him, barely missing his ship. Buck didn't hesitate. His hands were steady as he squeezed the trigger of his pulse cannons. Blue-white bolts of superheated plasma ripped through the void, striking the alien craft's shields. The enemy's shields popped like a soap bubble, and the bolts tore into the ship's hull. Armor boiled away, and the alien fighter exploded in a brilliant, silent fireball. Buck let out a whoop of victory, a rare moment of triumph in a battle that had so far been nothing but pain and destruction. But the victory was short-lived. A sharp pain shot through his side. He glanced down and saw a shard of metal protruding from his flight suit, just below his ribs. It must have been from his own ship, perhaps a fragment from the last attack. His breath hitched, but he didn't have time to focus on the injury. The battle raged on, and the Hive's forces were still coming. He gritted his teeth, trying to ignore the pain as he spoke into his comms, his voice coming out raspy. "Aegis to Ranger 1, come in," Buck called, keeping his tone steady despite the growing weakness in his body. The comms crackled with static before a familiar voice broke through. "Negative, Aegis," came the voice of Colonel Trent, commander of the Earth Defense Fleet's 23rd Ranger Squadron. "We're still neck-deep in squids up here. Regroup with the Valkyries and escort the troop transports to the surface. We need those jarheads to take out the Hive's planetary cannons. They're our only shot." Buck clenched his jaw. The Hive's forces had overrun Juno Colony, and the human fleet was stretched to its breaking point. The last thing they needed was the Hive to establish a staging ground on Juno. If they didn't take out those planetary guns, the entire fleet would be torn to pieces once they entered orbit. "Roger that," Buck replied through gritted teeth, his voice cold with resolve. Moving to rendezvous with the Valkyries now. Aegis out. The Aegis shook violently again as Buck pushed the throttle to full speed, racing toward the blinding chaos of the ongoing space battle. The sky was a mess of flashing lights, ships colliding, explosions rippling through the blackness. Human fighters were engaging the alien forces in tight formations, their sleek designs weaving through the deadly chaos with impressive agility. At the center of it all, Buck could see the enormous mass of the alien Queen ship, a grotesque, bloated monstrosity hanging like a dark moon in the void. From it poured endless waves of alien fighters, bombers, and boarding pods. It was like a monstrous hive spewing forth soldiers to overwhelm humanity's defenses with sheer numbers. His vision narrowed as he focused on the task at hand. He had to push through. He had to fight. But the pain in his side was growing unbearable, and his vision started to blur. The Aegis's shields were weakening from the constant barrage, and Buck knew his chances of survival were shrinking by the second. He gritted his teeth and forced his focus back to the mission. He couldn't afford to think about the pain, the injury, or the consequences. He had a job to do. Earth needed him. Ahead, the troop transports were in sight, but they were not alone. A fresh wave of alien fighters descended on the Valkyrie squadron, a group of elite human pilots tasked with protecting the transports. The Valkyries were skilled, but even they couldn't hold back the sheer onslaught of the alien forces. Buck pushed his ship forward, feeling the strain in his chest as he squeezed the trigger again. The pulse cannons fired with deadly precision, cutting down alien fighters one by one, but there were just too many. The Valkyries were giving as good as they got, their sleek Raptor-class fighters dancing between the enemy craft, tearing through them with pulse cannons and missiles. But the numbers were overwhelming. Buck watched as one by one, human ships winked out of existence under the relentless attack. Valkyrie lead to all units, a strained female voice crackled over the comm. "We can't hold them. Aegis, where the hell are you?" Buck's stomach clenched, but he didn't hesitate. "Right here, Valerie," he called out, his voice filled with resolve. "Let's send these bugs back to whatever festering hole they crawled out of." Valerie's Raptor fighter fell in beside him, and together they tore a path through the enemy, plasma bolts lighting up the darkness around them. For a brief moment, it felt like they might have a chance. The transports could make it to the surface. But then, in a flash of bright plasma, Valerie's fighter took a direct hit. The explosion was deafening, and Buck's heart sank as he watched her ship disintegrate. "I'm hit," Valerie's voice came through, laced with panic. "Port engine is gone. Life support failing." "Buck, it's been an honor." "Don't you dare die on me, woman," Buck shouted, his voice cracking as he fought the rising panic. "Eject. Punch out now." But it was too late. Valerie's fighter, trailing smoke and fire, rammed straight into the heart of the alien swarm. The resulting explosion consumed a dozen enemy ships, and Buck whispered a heartbreaking salute to her sacrifice. "You magnificent." He trailed off, blinking away the tears that threatened to blur his vision. Valerie had given her life to clear the path for the transports. Buck couldn't let that sacrifice go to waste. Alone now, Buck plunged into the fray with reckless abandon, his hands moving on autopilot, firing missiles and lasers into the oncoming enemy fighters. He didn't care about the alarms blaring in his cockpit or the blood soaking through his flight suit. His only focus was stopping the Hive. He couldn't let them win, not after all the lives already lost. But then, with a bone-jarring impact, a plasma bolt punched through the weakening shields of the Aegis and slammed into the fuselage. Consoles exploded, and the ship's cabin decompressed, the air screaming out into the void. Buck felt the shard of metal in his side tear deeper, and for a moment, everything went dark. A new world. The first thing Buck noticed when he regained consciousness was the absence of the cold, harsh winds of space, the relentless buzz of alarms, or the thrum of his fighter's engines. Instead, there was a soothing quiet, broken only by the gentle rustling of fabric. He blinked, his eyes heavy, and as his vision cleared, he was greeted by the sight of unfamiliar, crystalline windows towering above him. A warm, golden light streamed in, bathing the room in a strange, comforting glow. The room itself was sparse, yet elegant, with soft, flowing curtains that billowed gently as if the air had a life of its own. His hand instinctively went to his side, where the sharp pain from earlier still throbbed in waves. His ribs were bound tight in bandages, his chest exposed. Panic surged for a moment as he realized he was no longer in the Aegis. He couldn't remember what had happened after ejecting. Only the blackness that followed. "Where am I?" Buck muttered, his voice dry, rasping as he tried to sit up. The moment he did, a sharp pain shot through his torso, and he was forced to collapse back onto the soft bed beneath him. "Easy there, Earthling," a voice said from beside him. He turned his head slowly, and his breath caught in his throat. Standing by his bedside was a woman. No, not just a woman. She was a figure of myth, a goddess come to life. Tall, nearly 7 feet, her olive skin shimmered like it had been carved from marble, and her fiery red hair cascaded down her back in waves. Her eyes, amber and full of intelligence, met his, and for a moment, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. "You're awake," she said, her voice a low, melodic purr that sent a strange shiver through Buck's spine. "How do you feel?" He struggled to find words. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, but there was something else, an undeniable strength emanating from her that was both alluring and intimidating. She moved with the grace of a predator, as if every motion was carefully calculated. "Where am I?" Buck managed to rasp, his throat still dry. The woman smiled faintly, her lips curving in a knowing way. "You are in the city of Thyra, on the planet Hive." "Hip. What?" Buck blinked, still struggling to understand. "What system is this? How did I get here?" "Hippa," the woman repeated, her tone patient but firm. "We are far from your Earth. We exist in the Artemis cluster, a place few have ever discovered. A sanctuary, hidden away from the ravages of the galaxy." Artemis cluster. Buck's brow furrowed in confusion. The Artemis cluster was uncharted space, a vast, unexplored region, known only in hushed whispers by those few who ventured into its depths. But how? Why am I here? The battle. I was. "You were gravely injured," she said, her voice softening as she moved closer to him. "After your ship was destroyed, our scouts found your escape pod drifting in space. They brought you here. But my squadron, the fleet." Buck's words trailed off as the weight of his situation hit him. The battle at Juno Colony, the loss of his comrades, the Hive forces overwhelming them. It was all a blur of fire and death. He hadn't been able to do enough, hadn't been able to save them. And now, here he was, on a distant alien world, alone. Were there any survivors? The woman's expression shifted to one of sympathy, though her eyes held a deep sorrow. "We found no other survivors in the debris field. You are the only one from your fleet to survive." Buck squeezed his eyes shut in frustration. "I failed them," he whispered, his voice thick with grief. "I couldn't save them. The Hive will just keep coming. Earth won't survive this." "You fought bravely," the woman said, her voice firm, like a balm to his wounded pride. "Your people did all they could. We saw the wreckage, the cost in blood and metal. Your sacrifices will not be forgotten." Buck opened his eyes and met her gaze. There was something in her eyes, respect, understanding. She wasn't just some alien. She was a warrior too. But what did that matter now? The battle was over for him. Earth was falling to the Hive, and he was stranded on a foreign world. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "And why did you save me?" The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him with a curious expression. "My name is Alara," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I am one of the high priests of my people. We are known as the Hypatians." "Hypatians," Buck repeated, confused. "I've never heard of you." Alara nodded. "We have kept ourselves hidden for generations, protected from the chaos of the galaxy. But the Hive is growing stronger, and even our isolation cannot shield us from their threat." Buck stared at her, trying to absorb her words. It didn't make sense. How could an entire civilization be hidden from the galaxy? How had they escaped the Hive's notice? "I don't understand," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "Why me? Why did you bring me here? I'm just a soldier, a pilot." There's nothing special about me." Alara's gaze softened, and she leaned forward, her face inches from his. "You were chosen," she said, her voice low but urgent. "By prophecy." Buck froze, his heart skipping a beat. "Prophecy." Alara nodded. "Our people believe that one day, an off-worlder, one with the strongest genes, would come to us. He would help us defeat the Hive, and through him, we would find our salvation." Buck recoiled slightly. "You think I'm some kind of hero?" Alara gave him a small, knowing smile. "You don't believe it, but that is why you were brought here. You were chosen." Buck swallowed hard, trying to process her words. Chosen? By prophecy. It sounded absurd. But then again, he had seen so much in his life, so many strange and impossible things, that maybe there was some truth to it. "I don't know about this prophecy," Buck muttered, shaking his head. "But Earth needs me. The Hive, they're going to destroy everything." Alara's eyes flashed with something. Determination, perhaps. "Then you must prove yourself," she said firmly. "Only then will we be able to help your people. We can defeat the Hive, but only if you stand with us. You will need to show us your worth." Buck's mind was racing. He had no idea what she was talking about, but one thing was clear. If he wanted to help Earth, he had no choice but to trust her, and this strange, hidden civilization. "How?" Buck asked, finally looking her in the eyes. "How do I prove myself?" Alara's lips curved into a smile. "You'll see soon enough. The trials are about to begin," the prophecy revealed. Buck stood at the threshold of the Grand Palace, his chest still aching from his earlier injuries, but the pain was nothing compared to the weight of what lay ahead. Alara, the tall, enigmatic woman who had saved his life, had led him through the winding streets of the alien city. Everywhere he looked, Buck saw evidence of the Hypatians' power, their strength, and their isolation. The buildings were an extraordinary blend of nature and technology, with soaring spires of iridescent crystal and sleek metal walls that seemed to shimmer in the golden light. The streets were lined with lush gardens and flowing fountains, and the air was thick with the scent of strange, exotic flowers. Alien birds, some with wingspans as wide as a human's arm, chirped from the high branches of trees that seemed to glow in the soft light. But it wasn't the beauty of the city that caught Buck's attention. It was the people. The Hypatians were unlike any human he had ever met. Towering women with muscular frames and proud stances, their skin was a deep bronze hue, and their eyes shone with an inner light. Each one moved with a grace and confidence that made Buck feel almost insignificant in comparison. As they walked through the city, he noticed how the women regarded him, not with fear, but with curiosity and something deeper, like they saw him not as a mere man, but as something more. He was just a soldier, a pilot. But here, among the Hypatians, he was something else entirely. The weight of the prophecy loomed over him, even though he didn't understand it. Alara's footsteps echoed through the palace halls as she led him deeper into the heart of their domain. The walls inside the palace were adorned with intricate mosaics, depicting scenes of powerful warriors, majestic beasts, and celestial battles. At the far end of the long hallway, a pair of enormous double doors loomed, their surfaces etched with golden symbols. Alara stopped in front of them and turned to face Buck. "This is where it begins," she said quietly, her amber eyes searching his face. "The Queen will see you now. But know this, if you are to fulfill the prophecy, you must prove yourself worthy. Not just to our people, but to yourself." Buck nodded, still unsure of what this prophecy truly meant, but knowing that the fate of Earth, and perhaps the galaxy, depended on it. The doors before him opened with a low groan, revealing the grand audience chamber beyond. It was unlike anything Buck had ever seen. The chamber stretched up into a high vaulted ceiling, supported by massive columns that were covered in intricate carvings, depicting scenes of Hypatian warriors leading their people through ancient battles. The walls seemed to glow from within, casting an ethereal light throughout the room. At the far end of the chamber sat a throne, an enormous seat of gold and amber, carved with intricate designs of mythical creatures and celestial patterns. Upon that throne sat the Queen of the Hypatians. Her presence was undeniable, even from the distance. She was regal, powerful, and imposing. Queen Hippolyta was a vision of beauty and authority. Her silver hair was intricately braided, woven with gold threads that shimmered in the light, and her face was serene, yet fierce, with emerald eyes that seemed to see through Buck. Her gown, a flowing garment of white and gold, cascaded around her, as if the very fabric was alive, reacting to the energy in the room. Elara stepped forward, bowing respectfully before the queen, and then gestured for Buck to follow. Buck hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. Everything about this moment was overwhelming, but there was no turning back now. "Your Majesty," Elara began, her voice unwavering, "I bring before you Captain Eric Buck Rogers, the man foretold in our prophecy." Queen Hippolyta's gaze shifted to Buck, and for a long moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Buck met her eyes, but her intensity made him feel like he was being weighed and measured. His entire life had led him to this moment, and yet it felt as though nothing could have prepared him for this. "You stand before me, Earthling." Queen Hippolyta's voice rang out, strong and commanding, yet strangely compassionate. "The one whom my daughter believes will lead us to victory. The one whose genes are said to be the strongest in the galaxy. Tell me, Captain Rogers, do you believe in the prophecy?" Buck swallowed hard, his throat dry, but he couldn't let his fear show. "I don't know if I believe in prophecies," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I'm just a man. I'm not some hero or savior. But if you're right, and I can help you fight the Hive, then I'll do whatever it takes. For Earth. For the galaxy." The Queen regarded him silently for a moment, and Buck wondered if he had said the right thing. The room was heavy with the weight of their expectations, and he could feel the eyes of the assembled court watching him, evaluating him. Finally, Queen Hippolyta spoke again. "Your words are sincere," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "But sincerity alone is not enough. If you wish to gain our aid, you must prove that you are worthy. You must prove that you possess the strength not just of body, but of spirit and mind." Buck's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the trials that Elara had spoken of. He didn't know what they would entail, but there was no way out now. He was committed. "Prove my worth," Buck repeated, more to himself than to the Queen. "How?" "Tomorrow," Queen Hippolyta said, her gaze never leaving his. "You will undergo the trials of the Hypatian warrior. These trials are designed to test every aspect of your being. Your combat prowess, your endurance, your intelligence, your will, and above all, your ability to sacrifice." Buck's stomach tightened at her words. The trials sounded like they were going to push him to his absolute limits. But what choice did he have? If he wanted to save Earth and defeat the Hive, he had to pass these trials. Elara stepped forward and placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle but firm. "You will not face these trials alone," she said. "I will be with you every step of the way. But you must know this. Should you fail, the Hypatians will not aid you. The Hive will continue its rampage, and Earth will fall." Buck nodded grimly, understanding the stakes. There was no room for failure. Not now. Queen Hippolyta gave a single, imperceptible nod. "Rest tonight, Earthling," she said, her voice unwavering. "Tomorrow, you will begin your trials. Only then will we decide whether you are truly the one who can save us all." As Buck and Elara turned to leave the throne room, he felt the weight of the Queen's words settle over him. His future, the future of Earth, and the fate of countless worlds hung in the balance. He couldn't afford to fail, not when so much was at stake. But one thought kept nagging at him. If the Hypatians really believed that he was the one destined to save them, then why did he feel so ordinary? He was just a man, a soldier, a pilot, no different from any other man. Or was he? As they made their way back through the palace, Alara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "The trials begin tomorrow," she said quietly. "Are you ready, Captain Rogers?" Buck looked at her, his jaw set with determination. "I don't have a choice," he said. "I'll do whatever it takes. For Earth. For you." Alara's eyes softened just for a moment, and she gave a small nod. "Then let's hope you're as strong as they say."